Hi guys. So we're gonna do a sort of a few recaps on some of the lecture content for the sport practitioner. We've already gone over this stuff obviously in lectures, but I'm just gonna provide a bit of a recap on some of the concepts, sorry, and perhaps just go through where it links in. All right, to your assessment. So in terms of reflective practice, then, I know we've covered what it is, but we're going to look at what it is and ultimately and why we do it. Okay. So in terms of some definitions for you, all right. So in terms of what reflective practice is, all right, I'm not going to read each of these out, but some of the important things to take from these definitions is around recapturing their experience, all right, and then thinking about it. So you almost replay something that has already happened, all right. So you recapture the experience, you think about it, mull it over, and then probably more importantly is evaluate it. And in terms of that, try to make meaning to what has happened, all right. But recapturing the experience is sort of a primary aspect of reflective practice. Um, Sort of a second definition. So a dialogue of thinking, of doing, through which has become more skillful, competent to advance one's practice through critically examining. So the critically is really important. Okay, thinking about, well, what does that actually mean? Okay, being critical of your experience. What are the positives? What are the negatives? Really examining the experience with the intention of developing existing knowledge. So thinking about what was my experience, and then what have I learned because of that. What knowledge, what understanding do I now have, okay, or do I need to find out, that's going to help improve my future practice. Okay, reflective practice generally, forms the basis of sort of coaching progression and any sort of practitioner progression, right? Which is why it features quite heavily in this module, all right, and it sort of forms the initial aspect of your assessment anyway. So in terms of sort of what else it is, we can be considered an evolutionary process. All right. So in that context, it's talking about, for example, you have an experience, you reflect on it, and then you evolve because of that. So because you're critically reflective of the experience that you've had, you can therefore inform future practice either by thinking differently, trying something differently. If something didn't work before, you change it, and therefore you evolve. You evolve as a practitioner. All right. Backwards thinking on the experience, but again, linked to this evolutionary process, is the forward thinking on what could be. Okay, so not necessarily that it has happened, but based on the previous experience of thinking backwards, thinking what has happened, all right, and what your experience was, you can then think forward and think about what could be. All right, how could my practice look? How could my understanding develop? Okay, searching and finding, establishing meaning. All right, we've already mentioned that. That actually, if this occurred, what does this mean? Okay, so if I had a positive or negative experience, or something happened that I've reflected upon, what does then that mean for my practice? All right, you could think of different examples of where that might fit in. Okay, but ultimately, by going through the evolutionary process, thinking backwards to think forward, all right, you can then establish meaning to something that you've thought upon. And a lot of the time, it generates new ideas. Okay, so by thinking and reflecting back on your experience, thinking forward, thinking on what could be, what are the possibilities, it allows you to try new ideas and bring that sort of into the forefront. And in that sense, leads to that evolution in coaching practice. So in terms of why we do it, all right, we've already said that it can lead to sort of evolution and lead to practitioner development. But in terms of some of the other reasons why we might do it, all right, is understand, one, what we already know. So from an individual perspective, what do I know that happened in that? All right, perhaps identify what we need to know. That's probably an important thing. So can I can I make meaning of something that happened? So whether it was a particular participant disengaged, can I reflect on what did I do in that situation to make that happen? So identify what you need to know in order to advance understanding of the subject. Why did they disengage? Was it something I said? Was it the practice design? Was it the social interaction that happened? Was it my body language? Was it my rapport? Okay, so sort of reflecting can help, all right, particularly with the contextual. Make sense of new information and feedback in context of their own experience. All right, so a bit more relational. So if something happened, reflecting on that. So you tried something new, reflecting on that, which then obviously informs your own experience moving forward. And then in particular guide choices for further learning. So from a developmental point of view, and this is probably one of the more important ones that we're going to look at or focus on sort of through the assessment, is how reflective practice can be used to help sort of guide your choices in future learning, and that in particularly links with your action plan. Okay, so some of the reasons why we might do reflective practice. Lots of different things we can reflect on. Obviously, sort of if you're delivering, if it was, say, for example, it's a coaching session, you can reflect on many different things. All right, this is just an example of a list. It's not restricted to this at all. You know, you might reflect on a particular aspect of your practice. All right, but these just give you some sort of example. But in particular, what we're going to be looking at, again, in terms of the module, is what can we reflect on? Well, we're reflecting on sort of learning, we're reflecting on your strengths and weaknesses, all right, your action plan, and your personal development. So it's sort of inherent to that. Now, when we went through this during the lecture, obviously I asked you sort of to research the reflective models, all right, and make sense of them. Okay, so I'm not going to sort of not going to go through that today. The one perhaps we may focus on a little bit more is Gibbs' reflective cycle, and you were asked to do a short reflective log during the lecture. All right, so again, hopefully you engage with that, but it's more so you can understand what the process is. So with Gibbs' reflective cycle, if we start here with the description, is a description of the phenomena or the experience. All right, so what happened, and then you consider the emotion side of it. Okay, so the feelings, what were you thinking, what were you feeling? That can be cognitions, that can be the affective element of the emotions. And then you evaluate it. Was it a good, was it a bad experience? Excuse me. In terms of the analysis then, what can you make sense of it? So based on these thoughts, these feelings, and your evaluative sort of cognitions, what can you make sense of the situation? Analyze it. Perhaps what else you could have done, and then, you know, from that reflection thus far, is what is your action plan? If it arose again, what would you do differently, or what could you do? What else could you try to overcome or combat the description of what actually happened? Okay, so this is a reflective cycle. You would use this in coaching practice to theory as well. Okay, so you should be familiar with Gibbs' reflective cycle by now. But again, this is the sort of process perhaps that we're going to look at initially. All right. So in terms of sort of where reflective practice might fit in for you guys, so your first thing to consider through your assessment is sort of what reflective practice is and how have it used it to inform your approach to the module. So what I would be sort of inclined to talk about that is, one, introduce the concept of reflective practice. All right, so what is it for one? Why you use it? So why are you using it? And for me, that would link to the developmental part in particular, about sort of informing future practice, guiding your decision making on action planning. Okay, so introduce reflective practice. Tell me what it is, and then in particular how you've used it. So what I would suggest is that you link, you can link to any of the reflective cycles, but I would probably be more inclined to link to Gibbs' reflective cycle. All right, in terms of, okay, so what we're doing is the description. Okay, so where are you at the moment? In terms of your practice, in terms of your sort of journey, what are your thoughts, feelings, good, bad? Analyze it. All right, and then if it arose again, what would you do? So you have to sort of apply this loosely, all right, to what you're doing. But effectively, what you're doing is you're reflecting on all your experiences that you've had so far. Okay, so your description again is going to be quite loose and quite broad. But what you're doing is reflecting on your experience thus far, not just on the FTSC, That could be work-based learning. Okay, that could be additional coaching jobs that you guys do. So reflect on sort of your experience thus far. What are your thoughts and feelings about your experiences? Okay, generally, what was good, what was bad about the experience. Analyze it, so make sense of it. All right, and what you're sort of doing is mapping out. Okay, this is my experience. This is my analysis, my evaluation of it. And now what do I need to do differently? Okay, and this sort of reflective cycle obviously informs your consideration for your main action plan, which is when we look at the actual PDP process. Okay, so this will link nicely with PDP, but in terms of linking with your assessment, all right, introduce reflective practice. Tell me why you're going to use, or why you're using reflective practice. All right, and mainly because it informs your action planning. And then, like I said, apply it loosely to how you've utilized, reflective practice within the start of your assessment. Okay. What I will do is on the next screencast I'll introduce. This will take long actually, so yeah, I'll do that on the next screencast, but that'll probably come out at the same time as this one. All right, and we'll look at multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. All right, and what that means. All right. Any questions? Please ask. Cheers, guys.